Oh, by the way, these guys, just a little, just a quick little interesting point. These 4 desks control something like 98% of the fresh water in the state of California. Yeah, that's pretty rad. So anyway, something interesting happened in the Westlands. There was a lot of workers, and they organized. Go figure. You guys ever heard of Cesar Chavez, United Farm Workers? So, as agriculture was blowing up, people were building crazy machinery and more interesting chemicals, and the water was coming free, and there's a lot of profit, so there's a lot of investment. But as all of that was blowing up and agriculture was looking great, people are like, and how are the farm workers doing over there? And one of the other reasons that the bubble burst is because, as it turns out, farm workers were being, in many ways, underpaid, overworked, not very well cared for. And so in parts of California, we started to get some grumbling about exploitation of laborers. We had the Tulare Lake bummer, the consolidation of power into a few mega farms. We're starting to hear that maybe farmers aren't really benefiting. The Westlands was famous because the federal government and the state government invested millions of dollars, and everybody was like, okay, now we should see these communities grow in wealth, and instead, those communities became more and more poor because the farms were being consolidated, so they got more powerful, and they're like, if you don't want to work for a nickel an hour, go get a job from nobody. And so they actually turned the screws on the workers. And after the federal and state governments supported these farms, farm workers actually saw a decrease in working conditions, in pay, in healthcare. And so the United Farm Workers was born to combat these monopolies, these powerful agricultural monopolies. And then comes Jimmy Carter. I won't show you the video about him because it's kind of confusing, but I will tell you about him. How many of you have heard of former President Jimmy Carter? And I'm glad you've heard the name. Does anybody know anything about his presidency? Anything? Yes?
The runaway inflation, and he put
solar panels on the White House. Runaway inflation, kind of fumbled the Iran hostage thing a little bit, maybe, maybe not. That's what you asked. What else?
Yeah, helicopter.
The helicopter incident. What else about Jimmy Carter? I'm glad you guys do all these things. Know what the period is. Yeah. He was a farmer. And this is the part I really want to talk about. Already you've noticed all the things you need to know about Jimmy Carter right here. Not exactly ready for international affairs, because his political experience amounted to basically getting elected. He was what, governor for 2 years before that or something? And then he became president. That's it. Farmer, I think, whatever, anybody want to correct me on this? Senator, governor, or something? Couple of years of public office, and then he goes president. And he walks in and he's like, wow, cool, I'm president, all right. He was a humanitarian. He was like a really, honest to goodness, nice guy. Like, everybody that meets Jimmy Carter says he feels like you're talking to like a priest. Like, he's like patient and gentle and nice, like friendly, like smiles a lot, and like looks people in the eye. He like keeps his word. He makes promises. Horrible political strategy. He actually wants to help people. So he's like, who could it hurt? I'll put solar panels on the White House. Of course, he was mocked for this. All the energy powers crucified him for supporting alternatives to the big economic powerhouses of petroleum and coal. The next president took down the solar panels. Jimmy Carter was just like trying to be like a, hey look, farmer in the White House, I'm going to fix things. And understand that his hit list, this is a big deal. He actually led a series of congressional hearings to evaluate if federal dollars were being wasted. He said, look, I support agriculture because I'm a farmer. He said, I support water projects because I'm a farmer. But now that I'm president, I got to protect federal tax dollars. We can't just spend $200 million to build a dam where we have no people. He said we're not exactly doing very well. He said we have this runaway inflation problem. He said, look, I'll fix the inflation. We will stop crazy federal investment. And he said, let's just see if any of these water projects aren't a good investment for the federal government. Let's see if any of them aren't working. He leads congressional investigations, and it turns out, Evans project, taking too much money, not going to create a lot of economic activity. The Krause bill, not good for anybody. Daniel, well, he's got this one water project that's like building a dam to nowhere. We don't want to keep putting federal dollars. The Feinberg project has to die. Ryan's project, that's a lot of federal dollars, not really helping a lot of farmers. The Maury project has to die. And he created the Jimmy Carter hit list. A bunch of wasteful water projects that he was going to cancel. He was just trying to be careful with federal tax dollars. Stupid Jimmy Carter trying to fix things. Doesn't understand how politics works. Because then he had to get reelected. And he goes, hey, Krause, Feinberg, Maury, would you guys like to help me organize a fundraiser for my election campaign? And they go, bro, you stole my bacon. Can you imagine? When Ryan Maury goes to get elected, he goes, hi, everybody. I'd like to be your congressman, but just so you know, Jimmy Carter took your bacon. And everybody's like, boo for Carter. We want the barrel of pork. You can imagine, when you get a president that's actually trying to crack down on wasteful federal spending, that's not going to go too well for him. And the punchline is, he lost his re-election campaign, and the hit list disappeared. Remember, you might be able to get to be the president, but it's a lot harder to help people. Sorry to be so cynical. So by now, we have the Tulare Lake debacle, which created a bigger monopoly and wasted a beautiful place. We have the farm worker concerns. By irrigating the wetlands, we thought we were helping, and instead we ended up creating more monopolies and less successful farm workers. The Jimmy Carter hit list, which was a well-intended idea to evaluate federal spending, and in the end, just ruined his chances of being reelected. And finally, we have the debacle at the Kesterson Reservoir. Sorry, I want to give you the debacle, but I got to keep that forward again. You guys know what those white things are? Those are tomatoes. That's why tomatoes from the supermarket taste like cardboard, because you pick them when they're not ripe, but they have no sugar in them. Sorry, I swear we're going somewhere. Come on, Kesterson Reservoir. Come on, Kesterson Reservoir. Yep.
A story from NBC's Donald. Employees of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have been doing this for months, trying to frighten off birds and waterfowl from the toxic ponds at the Kesterson Wildlife Refuge.
It's kind of difficult for an individual who's been spending a lifetime trying to create habitat to be asked to try to move the wildlife away from this habitat that you've created. These traditions of the birds are very, very difficult to break. In fact, they're almost impossible, especially once they begin to nest. It was a war zone out here.
The valley's web of life had been thrown into chaos.
Many eggs are still found to contain deformed chicks. The Fish and Wildlife people refer to these mosquito fish as little selenium tablets.
The poisons from intensive farming and irrigation were deforming whatever tiny little museum pieces of nature were left.
Runoff from Westland's farms contained selenium. For years, drainage had concentrated the selenium in the Kesterson Pond, while the Bureau of Reclamation waited for a permit to dump it into the San Francisco Bay and Delta.
We went ahead with the Westlands project before we solved the drainage problem. We thought we knew how to solve the drainage problem. We thought the Kesterson Reservoir could be flushed on out into the Delta. We didn't have it to solidify. So I made a general mistake by going ahead with Westlands at the time we did.
David Burrington reports tonight that the problem begins on the farms and it winds up in the refuge. Many young birds have been killed and deformed by high concentrations of selenium, a trace element found in the region's soil. Last month,
It was really an eye-opener when we started to take a look at some of the embryos, the very distorted features, bills that were twisted, missing eyeballs, bulges on the brain, deformed feet. They remind me of the thalidomide babies that were over in Europe.
And these mud hens were up at this Kesterson place, and they were getting too much selenium. Too much selenium is widely known does cause birth defects and anything, so they get into deformed mud hens and things, which is unfortunate. It wasn't in the world.
When it exploded in our face with bird deformities, what gave all of our attackers the proof they need that agriculture really is bad. It does destroy the environment because we had some deformed birds out there. Kesterson was the proof. We were the bad guys, and it was really a turning point. And we would sit and struggle with a photograph of a bird, headlines in every newspaper and TV news every night, about this crisis at the end of irrigated agriculture, and 1 million acres are going to go out of production. We could not make a connection between how do we solve this problem and how do we deal with this public crisis over here that was created.
But for those mud hens, and but for those toxic Kesterson reservoir, that plan eventually would have continued to creep on. But those mud hens, they really turned the political history of the Central Valley Project.
It was all adding up. Public anger at the Kesterson fiasco, congressional investigations into water subsidies, farm labor, and salmon. And now,
So, the selenium thing was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. By the mid-1970s, California stopped building water works. And most of the United States has followed. Remember, the whole coming out of the Dust Bowl depression thing was pretty exciting. Better living through engineering. Federal tax dollars get people to work. This is looking really good. The food's going to be cheap. The water's everywhere. Piece of cake. And then it's like, wait a minute. We're just giving federal dollars to monopolies that apparently are not helping their workers and screwing their workers and giving up our beautiful big lakes like Tulare, and the federal dollars becoming all nasty. And then, where did the selenium come from? Where? What about agriculture? No! Not pesticides, not agrochemicals at all. Selenium was naturally occurring in the soil. But when you so the public goes, wait a minute, we can't even figure out what to do with our wastewater from all these farms. We're killing the birds in the wildlife refuge. Like the wildlife refuge was one of the wetlands we protected, and then we pumped all this water full of nasty runoff into the wildlife refuge wetland. And it's basically